Hi, everyone. Welcome to the seventh episode of Change with Colton. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Kaufman. He's a co founder and advisor at StockX, the leading global marketplace for sneakers, streetwear, and collectibles. With over 7 years of experience as the chief creative officer of StockX, he led the design, branding, and user experience of the platform, which has grown to over 30 million users and a valuation of $3.8 billion. He's passionate about supporting women and minority led businesses and initiatives that positively impact Detroit and the surrounding region. He's an advisor and investor in several startups. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Colton.
To kick it off, can you please take us through your life leading up to co-founding StockX and what led you to jump into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I was always somebody who loved solving problems, loved merging business with design. And it's something that I discovered at a very young age. It was something I was passionate about. And, at the time, I didn't really know what it was. But, I later found that, there was a name for a lot of the things I was doing and I was interested in. And, when I was super young, I almost had an obsession with letters and how letters looked and how different fonts essentially had different moods and emotion. And some of that was looking at the letters and the numbers on school buses, which were kind of these big, bold Gothic typefaces that felt serious, and looking at different logos and other typefaces. Some were kind of fun and whimsical and felt more inviting. And I didn't realize there was this thing called typography.
Mhm.
And, what I kind of learned over time was, how important that was to businesses, and especially from a brand perspective, and what that communicates. And, over time, it really started to spark a additional interest in design and art. And it just became something that I was really interested in. Even I think I was 13 or 14 when I got my first computer and got a student copy of very early version of Photoshop and Illustrator, and kind of fell in love with the digital creation of design and how that applied to branding and ultimately business. And what I kind of took from that was realizing that all of these things are a problem solving medium. Design is a part of the arts that is not just about creation. And a lot of times in art, you create something with the process in mind over the outcome.
Mhm.
And there's not always a lot of thought that goes into the outcome, because it's about creating something visually pleasing, something that the artist is passionate about. Where design is, some of that, but with design, you typically start with some kind of business problem. There's typically some research involved. You're typically working with some kind of data, and you do have an end goal in mind. That is either building a brand or increasing conversion, driving revenue. So it's a much different process. It's a much different frame of mind when you're going through that process. And to me, very early on, I was kind of fascinated with that. It's been wonderful to have a career where I've been able to merge both sides of that, from a creativity and art and design and business perspective, and really leverage those problem solving mediums to solve real business problems and create user experiences that make people's lives better, hopefully make things easier, and give people opportunities to do things they may not have been able to do.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, design intrigues me for sure. I plan on upskilling in that area because I see how important it is, and I love being creative and coming up with new ideas.
Hmm.
And it
it's uh,
really
it's very
does
fun.
make a huge impact to the brand.
Absolutely. Well, and I think when you pair these things together, and at StockX, We were very aware of how these things represented the brand, how we would show up authentically, and how to merge design with user experience, with ad creative, with copy, and think strategically from an integrated perspective of how all those things play together. And it can be really powerful when you get everyone on the same page and you have a really sound strategy and direction, and it's coming from a place of authenticity, and you've got the knowledge of data, and leaning on that intelligence and those learnings, and it can do wonders for a brand.
For sure. So, can you share a bit about your day-to-day experience as the co-founder and the chief creative officer of StockX, and then dive deeper into what we were just talking about in contributing to the shaping of the company's creative direction and brand identity?
Yeah, so it's hard to say there was ever a typical day, and that's very much the nature of a startup. Things change quickly, they move quickly. You have problems thrown your way that you didn't expect to pop up on any given day, and that's probably what I love most about startups is really the speed at which you have to operate, the intensity that you need to bring every day. But in the beginning, from a design and creative perspective, it was just me. And as a co-founder, you kind of find yourself doing everything. In the early days, it was not uncommon for us to be building boxes and putting shipping labels on packages and bringing carts of sneakers up a freight elevator, from a UPS truck, and packing them back up and taking them back down, or responding to customer service emails at 3 o'clock in the morning after we got the rest of the work done. And that's really the nature of being a founder. And on top of that, all of that, in the beginning, I was creating the logo, the brand, all of our marketing creative, our website, our app, all of our visual design. And over time, I was fortunate enough to be able to build a team, hiring designers and photographers and product designers, really being able to leverage those resources as a leader and learn how to delegate and learn how to really leverage people's skills. And part of that is building a really strong culture and team. And I think that's the most important part of business, and it's something that I really came to love over time, and focused a lot of time on that because I think it's so critical and so important, and I think it's the most important thing you can do in a business. But yeah, over time it was building the team to about 30 people, doing everything from all of our marketing creative, email, product design, photography. So even all of our product photography, we figured out how to do that in house and do 360-degree images of sneakers, which was a ton of fun. But it's also about hiring the right people and training the right people, and some of that was hiring people who were passionate and willing to figure things out, because some of these things we hadn't done before. And that's also a really fun part of startups, or can be, is that, a lot of times there's something that nobody knows how to do, and you get to be the person to do the research or experiment or meet with potential vendors, or try new technologies. And there were a lot of cool moments where we got to do that too, not just from a product photography perspective, but from the authentication side of things, and building out our authentication centers, even, figuring out how to create a secure authentication tag that couldn't be tampered with and had some built-in security features, and figure out how to manufacture those and design it in a way that it's tamper proof. Just super interesting processes all along the way. Many things that I'd never done before, but a ton of fun learning about and figuring out, and being a part of.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. I feel like when you don't know something and you have to jump in and learn, that's where I get into the flow state. And get the juices flowing.
Absolutely.
Can you share an experience where you had to overcome failure and self-doubt while building StockX? And then what advice do you have for entrepreneurs facing similar challenges?
I think that happens a lot in startups, or certainly has in my experience. I think the biggest part of that is really embracing it as a part of the process, because you're going to fail. You're going to try things that don't work. You're going to make mistakes with your customers. You're certainly going to make mistakes with your employees, and you're going to make decisions that they don't necessarily agree with. And sometimes you're making the right decision, sometimes you're not. But for me, the biggest thing is to listen and to learn and to approach things with a growth mindset. You certainly can't let ego get in the way when you're building a business, because that's it's the fastest path to disaster. But I think one of the most important things I learned along the way was, when the business is scaling, no matter how fast it's scaling, no matter how fast your revenue is growing, which is amazing, you can't lose sight of the problems in the business, because everything in the business will scale proportionally at the same time. So if
Wow.
your revenue is growing, your team's getting bigger, your customer base is growing, everything looks great on paper, but there are things going on behind the scenes from a cultural perspective or from a process perspective that you haven't figured out or you haven't given attention to. Those problems continue to get bigger as the business grows. And the sooner you can identify those, the sooner you can put processes in place, you can build the culture in a way that it scales and it feels like a safe, collaborative place for people to learn and work and really be excited to show up every day. The stronger the business you're going to have. And ultimately it's about creating a sustainable business that of course drives profitability and scales, but at the same time is a place where people want to work and people want to show up and people want to stick around for a long time, because the greatest value you have in any business is the people. And especially the people that have been around for a long time, because they have all of that institutional knowledge that you can't get by going outside the four walls of your company. And I think so many people make the mistake of taking that for granted and thinking that people are disposable or replaceable. And yes, like any job function is, but the knowledge that comes with people and the things that people learn over time and the passion that people have about a brand or a company or the business that they work on every day, that can't be replaced. That can't be replicated. And it's super important to really nurture that and foster that and allow that to grow over time.
Definitely. So, do you have any other tips to build that culture as you scale?
I think the biggest thing is, from a leadership perspective, you have to lead by example, and you have to show vulnerability. You really have to instill a sense of trust in a team. And that comes from many places. But I think two really important ones are, your team will model your behavior. And that means if you act like everything is perfect and you're never having a bad day and you're never overwhelmed, well, people will want to look at that behavior and say, this is what it takes to get to that level. So I'm going to do the same thing. Now, all the while, you're maybe full of anxiety on the inside and on the edge of some kind of breakdown, which is not at all healthy. On the flip side of that, if you are open and honest with your team when you're stuck on a problem or you're overwhelmed, just knowing it's okay to say, hey, I need help, or hey, I can't figure this out, or hey, I have no idea how to do this, while maintaining the attitude like, we will figure it out, but I have no idea what I'm doing right now. And I think that's super important. And I think demonstrating that level of vulnerability with your team gives them permission to also show a level of vulnerability, to admit when they need help, to admit when they've made a mistake, and give them an opportunity to learn from it. I think way too often in today's corporate culture, there's this sense of you kind of put on like this tough facade and you pretend like you've got everything figured out and you fake it till you make it. And,
Hmm.
I think there's a certain amount of truth to that if you're, dealing directly with a client and you don't want to show that there's any weakness there and give them any reason for pause. But internally with your team, I don't think there's anything that builds a stronger sense of community and camaraderie than showing vulnerability and demonstrating that you're not perfect and it's okay when things go wrong. As long as you're learning from them and you're growing, mistakes are a great investment of time. Something that I have always told every team that I've led is I would far rather you get in trouble for doing something than not doing something. And that means taking risks. That means trying things. That means going above and beyond and taking an initiative and doing things that you weren't necessarily asked to do. But those are the best kind of people you can have on your team. Sometimes it's not going to work out. Sometimes people are going to make a mistake. But, at least you were trying. And, if you try, it's either going to work or you're going to learn. There's not much else that comes out of it. We're not rocket scientists. We're not brain surgeons. We're not doing anything life threatening. Right. So it's typically a great opportunity to experiment and learn. On the inverse of that, the worst possible thing you can do in my book is, nothing at all. Is taking no initiative, not being self-motivated and driven and curious and waiting for people to tell you what to do. Those people are not leaders and they don't add a lot of value to a business if they don't have that level of passion or confidence, or they don't feel that they have that autonomy to do those types of things. And, a lot of times that's driven by the type of culture that a leader has set and that they're following.
There's a lot to unpack there. I definitely agree. Like, you have to show vulnerability, and your team is there to help you get through that and build the company together for the common goal.
Mm-hmm.
For the people that are just scooting by, is there something you can do to help them change their mindset?
In most cases, yes. And, that also comes down to the importance of coaching and mentoring and really setting an example that they can hopefully, model and live by. And, granted, like, you're going to have some people that are just never going to get there for whatever reason. They may not have the motivation. They may not believe in the mission of the business, and that's okay too, because there's something out there for them that they are going to be passionate about and they are going to be motivated by. And it's a good opportunity for them to find that and to move on. And, there's no need to keep somebody in a position or to stay in a position where somebody is unhappy and unfulfilled and unmotivated, because all that does is bring them down and ultimately brings the rest of the team down. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is really coaching people, giving people opportunities to do the things that they want. I've had people that were on my team seemed absolutely miserable. They were never going to be happy. They were never going to be motivated. And, sometimes it was just kind of changing their day to day, giving them something different to do. And all of a sudden they find something that they absolutely fall in love with. And it's like an entirely different person. And that applies to all of us. Like, we're all motivated by different things. We're all excited about different things. And to me, there's nothing more miserable than waking up in the morning and, spending hours doing a budget and an Excel spreadsheet. That's a special place in hell to me. But, I have friends in finance where they get just as excited about that as I do designing a new piece of software or a cool brand campaign. Everybody has that thing that really creates a spark for them. And it's different for all of us. And as a leader, it's your job to figure out what that is for your team and to leverage people's skills and passions to the best of your abilities. Some of this is around how you hire and what you hire for. And I've never tried to hire the people that were the absolute best at what they did. I was hiring people that had passion and were coming with a growth mindset, a willingness to learn, excitement for what we were building. If you have somebody with those qualities, you can teach them how to be a good designer or a good photographer, art director, or writer, or whatever it is. But you got to start with the passion. And on the flip side of that, sometimes you try and bring in the most qualified person in the world with the most amazing resume, and the final output is gorgeous and might win some awards. But there are also moments when you take that approach that you realize how some of those people get from point A to point B is not something you want happening in your business, because there are people that might be the best at what they are in the world, but they have an absolute terrible attitude and they leave a path of destruction behind them.
Hmm.
And even though the end product may be beautiful, what happens when throughout that process, everyone else on the team is demoralized, or they don't want to come to work, or they're no longer excited about working for you? It's not worth it. You're way better off kind of taking what is the sabermetrics approach and finding people that may not be the best individually at every single thing they do, but when they come together, they work really well together as a team. They have that chemistry, they have that passion, there is that sense of trust and vulnerability, and that's when the real magic can happen.
Definitely. Yeah, I think having individuals like that can be a poison to the rest of the team.
Absolutely. I call them a virus.
Do you have any hiring practices where you identified that passion in the hiring process?
I think a lot of times when people have that passion, when the people have that energy, it will just come out in the interview. It's undeniable. Now, sometimes you'll get people that they have that passion, they have that energy, but the anxiety of the interview is maybe overshadowing that and it doesn't necessarily come out. But I think the goal as an interview and as a leader is to really try to draw that out of people with the right questions, really asking them what kind of problems they want to solve, why they want to solve those problems, what types of things they enjoy working on, getting a feel for difficult situations that they had to manage in the past, how they approach things when they have no idea what they're doing. What I've also learned over time is there are two characteristics of the best employees I've ever had. And the first one is the ones that are willing to say, I don't know how to do this. Because that's a moment of vulnerability, especially with your leader, to say, I don't know how to do this. Now, you want them to also say,
I'm willing to learn.
I'm willing to learn. I need help figuring it out. That is usually a huge green flag when it comes to an employee, because one, it means that they are willing to admit they don't know everything. They feel comfortable sharing some level of vulnerability, and which leads into the second most important thing that I have observed, which is people who are willing to ask questions. And the employees that I have trusted the most on my team over the years are the ones that check in regularly with questions and say, hey, I'm not sure what to do here, or I'm stuck, or I need some help navigating XYZ, because it means they're not off on their own, stuck on a problem, not saying anything about it, potentially going down the wrong path, doing something that could be detrimental to the business. Getting that gut check is super important. And I can't count how many people came to me with questions that I had no idea how to answer. But then you have two people navigating the organization saying, okay, we don't know how to do this, but let's figure out who does or who's the right person to ask. And when you talk about culture in organizations and positive change in organizations, you really learn that knowledge sharing is such a huge part of that. And you really learn how much trust and vulnerability play into that, because if you think you know everything,
You
you have no reason to engage in knowledge sharing. You have no reason to learn. You have no reason to experiment. You have no reason to ask people questions. But the second you do, what happens? You start making connections with people in the organization that you maybe never want to talk to. You start learning things that are maybe some long-term institutional knowledge that you weren't aware of, that there is some process or procedure in place for a reason that happened years ago that you weren't involved in. And just as importantly, it puts you in a position to kind of question the status quo and to ask, why do we do this way? And a lot of times what happens is someone new to the organization will ask that question. And the people that have been there for a long time will go, actually, there's not a reason why we do it that way. It's just kind of the way we started doing it and never thought of a better way to do it. And suddenly you've got somebody, it could be an intern coming in straight out of college. And they're like, oh, I've got a way that's going to shave 50% of the time off this process that you guys have never thought of. And like those kind of moments are just
huge.
unbelievably satisfying and eye-opening, because you get so deep in the weeds in a business, especially in a startup, because you're running around doing everything. You rarely have time to kind of sit back and really reflect on the processes that you're engaging in, on the things that you're doing, because you just have to get so much out the door. And bringing people in that have a fresh perspective on these things can be unbelievably powerful and can generate so much positive change within an organization.
Definitely. I think building that culture where you accept change is key, as well as like collaborating cross functionally. That's where the diverse perspectives come in and where growth happens.
Absolutely.
So, to jump a little back, can you tell us how you landed your first 1,000 customers at StockX?
Yeah, it was not an easy process, and it was a lot of experimentation over time. And I think in the beginning we were pretty successful around building the platform relatively quickly, creating a stable functioning piece of software, which is half of the equation. And then the other part you get into is, okay, well, how do we get people to use it? Some of that comes from building community and creating great content and engaging with people on social platforms. But that's tough in the beginning because nobody knows who you are, nobody's familiar with
Right.
your brand. So that can be more powerful, kind of re-engaging people over time. But for us in the beginning, we had a really challenging problem that most marketplaces experience, which is, who comes first, the buyers or the sellers? That's a classic chicken and egg scenario. But from our perspective, what we had decided was, if we don't have buyers, sellers will never have a reason to come to the platform. They'll never have a reason to list their products, to put that effort in. So we need to be able to demonstrate that there is activity on the platform. And in the early days, you can't get buyers to buy something that doesn't exist. So what we did was we started looking at all of the popular sneaker profiles at the time, colorways, everything that was basically selling for significant premium on the secondary market, letting us know that it was high demand, it was, limited production products. And we started basically figuring out the market value of those products were, listing them on StockX, using digital marketing to drive traffic to the site. And when somebody would buy one of those things, even though a seller wasn't selling it, we would complete the transaction and we would go out and find it. We did that a lot. And we burned through millions of dollars doing that. But in the process, we created a huge user base and very active buyers, which led to sellers catching on that there were buyers on the platform. Relatively quickly, those sellers started listing their products. Buyers started buying the products that they were listing. We no longer had to kind of manually seed the platform. We were fortunate in the beginning to have an investor who was willing to put the capital into the business, was really willing to let us burn a lot of cash to be able to do that. And if we hadn't done that, would we have still been successful at some point? Probably, but I think it would have taken us much longer to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But doing that, we were able to build up a customer base quickly. We were really able to take advantage of that first Black Friday that we had, having a lot of people essentially seated on the platform at that point, and then having sellers on board. We quickly shot from a couple transactions a week to 100 a day to 1,000 a day.
Wow.
It's really kept going up from there.
Yeah, sometimes I think at the beginning you have to manufacture that growth and then do things that don't scale until they do.
Yeah, and you have to make the investment, and you really have to believe that it's going to pay off, because you're not going to make money day one.
For sure. So going off of that, what's your take on bootstrapping versus getting venture funded?
I think it depends on the type of business. I think anything that's super tech heavy is extremely challenging to bootstrap, especially if you're a founder that doesn't have an engineering background. And I think, without capital, it's typically challenging to move as fast as you need to move. I think time to market is a huge indicator of success in the startup world. And if you can take on some capital and you can really accelerate growth, I don't see many scenarios where that doesn't end up being beneficial for the founders. And yes, you're going to give up a share of ownership, and you're going to have to trade equity for cash, but ultimately you are way better off having half a watermelon than a whole grape.
Right.
And I think it's something that so many founders lose sight of, where they see themselves being diluted over time, and they're so focused on the percentage of the business that they own. And often when I ask people is, would you rather own 5% of a multi-billion-dollar business or 100% of a six-figure business?
Yeah.
And the math is a no-brainer. And I think that's what people really need to realize is, you're not just giving up ownership. Like, you are giving yourself runway. You are giving yourself freedom to work on the things that need to be done for the business without worrying about running out of cash, or how you're going to pay your bills, or how you're going to eat that evening. That can be super liberating for a founder. I would say the second part of that is, it's a really great opportunity to be strategic about it, especially when you're raising money, because you can bring on investors that essentially serve as extensions of the team. Most investors don't want to write a check and say goodbye. They want to be involved. They want to be updated. They want you to ask them questions. And if you can bring on people that have experience doing the things that you don't know how to do, those are free resources you get to tap into. You get the capital, but then you get all of that knowledge at the same time. For us, when we were scaling globally, dealing with international taxes and duties and currency conversion and translation and things like that were things that we never really thought about or knew how to do, and we certainly hadn't done before. But having investors that are also, advisors and partners in the business that have done those things before and could point us in the right direction helped us avoid making lots of costly mistakes, because those are things that, one, you don't want to experiment with, because you can go down a highly detrimental slope very quickly. And two, they can take a really long time to figure out and a lot of money to figure out. So if you have the answer right away and you don't have to go down that path, you can work on things that are far more important and spend your money far more wisely.
Definitely. It's kind of like a shortcut.
Absolutely. And, I mean, you need all the shortcuts you can get.
So, how do you identify investors? Say you have 5 investors interested. How do you identify who's a good fit for your company?
Well, I think first you have to find investors that are aligned with the mission and vision of the company because like they are going to have input. They are going to influence your business. And if they're not aligned from a vision perspective, they're not aligned from a cultural perspective, they're probably not going to be a good fit. And, I'd say the second thing you look for is what else have they invested in? Like what kind of track record do they have? What successes have they had? What's in their portfolio that aligns with what you're doing and could be potential connections that they could make for you as a part of their advisory function in the business. And I think looking at all of those things together can really help you weigh, in addition to their willingness to cut the check that you need, is kind of the combination that you need to assess to decide who you're going to take money from. Some investors are going to have their own knowledge to share, and many of them are former startup founders themselves who got into venture capital, and that's great because they know how to navigate these things from their perspective as well. And that firsthand knowledge is super powerful because you don't want to have to try to reinvent the wheel every time you do something. Um, if you've got people you're connected to that have made the mistakes already, you don't have to make those same mistakes again.
For sure. So, how long does it usually take? So, from pitching an investor to getting a check? Obviously, it's different for every instance, but like an average maybe?
It really depends on the investor, the size of the investor, the size of the investment. If you're dealing with angel investors, there are some you can close a deal in weeks or less than a month. Bigger VCs, sometimes it takes months. It could be 6 months, it could be 8 months. Because also a part of that process is you're not always looking for one investor. Sometimes you have a lead investor and you're looking for other investors to join. And then in other cases, you've got some smaller investors who are interested, but they're really looking for a lead investor to
Take charge.
validate that business and that investment. So you may have them with a tentative term sheet that's going to end up, ultimately being dictated by whoever that lead investor is. And that's a process that can take months and months and months.
Thanks for sharing that. I've always been curious about that.
Mhm.
So, if a founder's pursuing raising money in today's market, do you have any tips for pitching?
I think that the biggest thing is you have to be super clear about the problem you're solving and the potential for growth that problem offers. Especially in the last 12 months, I think we've seen a lot of VCs really pull back on their investments. There's a lot of hesitancy in the market right now. I think there's a lot of concern about the past couple of years when you look at a lot of the big tech IPOs, marketplace IPOs, that some of these companies went out the gate and just tanked, immediately dropped 70-80%. And I think that has changed investing philosophy a bit around people really investing in the value of a user base versus how you're driving revenue from that user base. And what I'm hearing these days is people are more interested in a smaller user base that's actually driving revenue than a larger user base that is essentially just racking up server costs. Because the technology of running a business with millions of users who aren't buying anything is a great way to burn cash. So I think you need to have a very compelling case around the problem you're solving, what you're building, the strength of your team, and how that problem you're solving is going to drive revenue and long-term growth and sustainability for the business. And if you can't articulate those things, I can't imagine anyone investing in that company.
Great insight. Thanks for sharing that. So, can you share a little bit about what you're doing now? I saw a piece called Competition Will Destroy You Until You Visit the Graves. Can you explain the meaning of this piece and where your inspiration came from for it?
Yeah, so a little over a year ago, I decided I wanted to do grad school. I was spending 14 hours a day on Zoom meetings, was ready to do something different, didn't have my next business figured out yet, but always wanted to do grad school and was finally in a position in my life where I could take a couple years off to do that. Ultimately decided to do 2 grad degrees at the same time, working on my Master of Science in Organizational Change at Northwestern, and then also doing a Master of Fine Arts in 2D design at Cranbrook Academy of Art. I've had a really amazing opportunity to have a studio practice and to experiment and to do some conceptual work that I didn't really have a chance to do in the business world. And that piece specifically, it's introspective and also speaks to American culture at the same time, and really around our constant need for things that we don't really need, and the things that we spend money on, the things that we focus our time on, in many cases at the end of the day, are not the things that really bring us joy or fulfillment, or if we're laying on our deathbed are going to think back and be thankful that we bought that watch or that bag or that car, more likely to regret the time we didn't spend with family and friends and the things that are really important. That really speaks to that.
It's a great opportunity to explore your passions, and that's a very powerful piece. Do you have any last minute thoughts, and where could people find you at, and how could the audience be useful to you?
Yeah, I mean, people can find me on Instagram. I'm probably most active there. My handle is Kaufstagram, it's kind of a blend of art, design, business. But I think the biggest thing I want people to take away is really just the importance of culture and team. And as you build a business, or if you're not an entrepreneur and you're thinking about an organization you're going to work for, just really make sure that their mission and values are aligned with what you want to accomplish, what you want to do, the difference you want to make in the world, because we spend more time working than anything else. So it's important to make it fulfilling. And I think that makes all the difference.
Great. Thank you for sharing amazing insights on culture and many other topics. I'll add those in the show notes. I appreciate your time. Thanks again for joining Change with Colton episode 7. Remember to be grateful and stay blessed.
Thanks, Colton. I appreciate you having me.